Hi guys. Since I wasn't sure if we'd have time to get through all of this in class, I wanted to make this content available to you outside. So I hope that this is a beneficial way for you to learn some of the content for this unit. We're going to talk today about the unification of Italy and Germany. We mentioned during the talks about imperialism that there was a lot of nationalism taking place throughout the world. And nationalism is really going to affect a lot of places, particularly in Western Europe. So our last slide is going to talk about some of those things. But as you are studying, maybe a good tip for either this test or for the AP exam is to reflect on how nationalism during this time period really affected a lot of these Western European countries. So first, let's talk about the unification of Italy. How did we get from this Italy that's divided by different states into the country of Italy that we have today? In 1859, Camillo Benso, Count of Cavour, or he's known as Cavour, ruled. He was the king of Sardinia and this little area up here, this orange on the map, or the Count. So Cavour really wanted to unify Italy all of together. He basically wanted to become more powerful. He believed in a lot of the Enlightenment ideas like natural rights, constitutional monarchy, a balanced monarchy, but he also believed in something called realpolitik, or the actual politics that would be appropriate at the time, politics of reality. He used a lot of manipulation in order to advance his own ideas, and he wanted to reduce the power of the Pope. He was really afraid of the power of the Pope in his country, and actually the unification of Italy is going to reduce a lot of the Pope's power in politics in the West. He aligned himself with the man Giuseppe Garibaldi and his military group, the Red Shirts, which is fighting some battles down here in the south, these red arrows. Cavour is able to finally, through military strategies, finally able to unify all of Italy in 1870. However, unification was not the answer. There were still a lot of issues in Italy, particularly in the south. There was a lot of poverty, which led to a lot of immigration in the late 1800s to countries like the United States and actually Argentina. All right, next, let's move on to the unification of Germany. Nationalism was really rising in Germany while it was occupied by Napoleon, both Napoleon I and Napoleon II, in the mid-1850s. There was a leader, Otto von Bismarck. He was a Prussian leader, a politician, and he wanted to use a lot of the ideas that Cavour did, used a lot of nationalist feelings, a lot of pride in Germany, pride in being Prussian, and instead of trying to force out some of the French leaders. So he engineered a couple of wars. First, Austria and Prussia, which is this area here, against Denmark to the north. Second, he went to war against Prussia, Austria versus Prussia. And then he went to war against France versus Prussia. And through all of these wars, the last war is actually called the Franco-Prussian War. In each of these wars, he's able to defeat his enemies and gains territory. So the red line you see is going to become the boundary of the German Empire. It's close to what we know it is today. It's close, with a little cutout down in here. After Germany is unified, the first leader is Kaiser Wilhelm I, and he is a kind of a head of the German Empire, but Otto von Bismarck was known as the Chancellor, and he still had a lot of political power. He was a big opponent of labor unions. He did not like them. He thought that would create a welfare state. So instead of, to kind of entice workers to his support instead of the labor unions, he created things like social insurance laws is what they're called. So old age pensions and workers' compensation for injuries and illnesses. A lot of those things that we know is pretty standard today as protection for workers. Otto von Bismarck was the one that instituted a lot of them, primarily in an attempt to draw people away from the labor unions. So both Germany and Italy were on the rise. Oh, and Kaiser Wilhelm I leads into like the mid 1880s, and then Kaiser Wilhelm II is going to take over in the late 1880s, and he's going to be the one to lead them into World War I. That name, both of those names, Otto von Bismarck and Kaiser Wilhelm II, will come up again when we are talking about World War I. So I told you we were going to talk about the effects of nationalism. I want to mention Austria-Hungary and the Balkan Islands. Again, we're going to get into them a lot more when we talk about World War I and the causes of that, but I think it's important to note here too the effects of nationalism. So this area in here is known as the Balkans, kind of Greece, areas of the Ottoman Empire up to almost Austria. You see Italy here and then Russia in the upper right-hand corner. This area, the Balkans, was occupied by a lot of Slavic populations. Russia is very Slavic, Romania, Bulgaria, Serbia, all very Slavic, and even Bosnia, a very high Slavic population. Through the Balkan Wars, Austria-Hungary is able to overtake Bosnia and incorporate it into its empire. So this territory of Bosnia, I'm pointing to it like you can see it, Bosnia is now, in 1913, was included in Austria-Hungary. But all of these areas had significant nationalism as being Slavic, not as being Austro-Hungarian. And so that's going to create a significant source of tension within the Balkan area. And when we talk about it in World War I, it's actually going to be known as the powder keg of Europe, because one little spark and the whole thing could ignite. So as you're studying, consider the effects of nationalism on this area, Austria-Hungary and the Balkan Islands. The effects of nationalism in Germany and how Otto von Bismarck capitalized on that. What about nationalism in France coming out of the Napoleonic Wars? And then in Italy, how did Cavour use that to unite his areas? Russia beginning reflecting on the Slavic populations that are there. And then in Britain, did nationalism have any effects in Britain as well? One little movement that we need to talk about during this time period was the Dreyfus Affair. There was lots of anti-Semitism that was coming up. There was a lot of Zionistic or Zionism movements. The idea is that Jews needed to establish their home state, and they needed to have that they weren't safe anywhere in a government that was not, particularly protecting them. So this idea of Zionism, it became particularly apparent in 1894 in France with the Dreyfus Affair. A French general who was also Jewish was accused of treason or acts against the state. He was put on trial and was found guilty. And it wasn't until much later, after he had served time in prison, that it came out that he was falsely accused. And he was released and cleared of all charges. But at that point, it became really apparent to the Jewish community that even in France, where there wasn't a lot of outward acts against them, that even the Jewish community needed to have some protection, which is where the idea of having a Zionist state comes in. And we're going to talk about that a lot more in the next 50 years, particularly getting into the creation of Israel. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this recording of me, and it helps in your studying and your learning of the content. Have a great day. Bye. Now I need to stop it.